أمي نادت على ستي قالت لها ارمي لي المفتاح نتخبى في الغرفة تبعكم تحت. بدها يقتله. اجت اختي حكت له بشتري منك مشترى بس تقتلوش. قلعت المصاري. اختي معها 200 دينار استرليني اعطته اياهم. اخذ المصاري ودفع اخوي نزل على البستان تحت ووقع اخوي ركع على راسه هيك. اجى اليهودي ركع وحط له ال5 طلق براسه. قتلوه قدام اختي بعد ما اخذ المصاري من اختي.
واذا صوت اطلاق نار فصار اخوي الصغير يصيح ويعيط ويما ترى اخوكي. امي اخذتنا جوا الدار في الزاويه وكان في طاوله حطتنا تحتها من شان تحمينا.
بالفعل اعطاهم وطن قومي في فلسطين.
Nekbe for me is part of our history. Myself, my siblings, and I guess all the Palestinians of my generation, we grew up hoping that one day the wrong that was done to our people will be corrected, and one day we shall return.
...15 Mayıs 1948. İsrail'in her yıl kuruluş yıl dönümü olarak kutladığı bu tarih, Filistinliler için felaketten başka bir şey ifade etmiyor. Nekbe, yani Büyük Felaket olarak adlandırılan o güne dek Filistinlilere ait yüzlerce köy haritadan silindi, binlerce Filistinli öldürüldü, yüzbinlercesi geri dönmemek üzere topraklarından sürüldü. 1948 yılı Filistinliler için sadece acı dolu bir dönemin sonu değil, tam aksine hiç dinmeyen bir acının başlangıcıydı.
אנו מכריזים בזאת על הקמת מדינה יהודית בארץ ישראל.
So from the beginning, Britain committed itself to helping the Zionists to create a state in Palestine.
Britain historically had colonial interests in the region. Palestine was on the way toward India, halfway between Europe and India, and it was going to be an important point to refuel ships that were heading towards India.
The British took over Palestine early on, probably with the onset of the First World War.
Birinci Dünya Savaşı Filistin'in kaderini belirleyen önemli bir kırılma noktasıydı. Osmanlı İmparatorluğu'nun ittifak devletlerinin yanında savaşa katılması İtilaf devletlerini endişelendiriyordu. Osmanlı'nın Arap-Müslüman dünyasını kışkırtarak savaşı kutsal bir savaşa dönüştüreceğinden korkuyorlardı. Bu nedenle o dönem var olan Arap milliyetçiliğinden faydalanıp bağımsızlık taleplerine destek oldular.
And then in 1915 they concluded an agreement with the Sharif of Mecca, ruler of Mecca, Sharif Hussein, and they promised him that if he sided with them against the Turks, the British would enable him to have an Arab kingdom covering the territory from Aleppo in the north all the way to Mecca in the south. So he led the revolution or the rebellion against the Ottoman Empire. In 1916, the British changed their mind and forgot about the Sharif of Mecca and forgot about the Arabs, and they signed an agreement with the French called the Sykes-Picot Agreement.
They decided to carve up the region, Iraq to the Brits as a mandatory, and Syria to the French, and of course Palestine to the British.
1917'de yani Birinci Dünya Savaşı henüz devam ederken Filistin nüfusunun %90'ı Araplar, %10'unda azıysa Yahudilerden oluşuyordu ve Yahudiler toprakların sadece %2'sine sahipti. Yani 20 yıl önce İsviçre'de 1. Siyonist Kongre'yi toplayan Avusturyalı gazeteci Theodor Herzl'in Yahudi devleti hayalini bu topraklarda gerçekleştirmek hiç kolay olmayacaktı. Ta ki aradıkları desteği bulana kadar.
There is absolutely no way that the Zionists could have achieved their objective, an independent Jewish state in Palestine, without British support. It's only because Britain supported the Zionist project that it was able to get off the ground.
2 Kasım 1917'de dönemin İngiliz Dışişleri Bakanı Lord Arthur Balfour, Uluslararası Siyonist Hareket'in liderlerinden Lord Rothschild'a bir mektup gönderdi. Balfour, 67 kelimelik bir paragrafla Filistin'de Yahudi halkı için ulusal bir yuva kurulacağının sözünü veriyordu. Böylece İngilizler o dönem hala Osmanlı yönetiminde olan bir ulusu başka bir ulusa yeni bir ülke olarak resmen vaat etmiş oldu.
Balfour Declaration was a classic colonial document which completely disregarded the rights and aspirations of the great majority of the people of Palestine, and was just a promise by Britain to the Jews, to the Zionists, which had no legal standing.
Balfour Declaration was, in a sense, the birth certificate of the State of Israel.
Britain, the colonial power, chose to give national rights to the Jews, to the Jewish minority, and to deny it to the Arab majority. And to add insult to injury, Balfour Declaration didn't refer to the Arabs as Arabs, but it referred to them as, quote, the non-Jewish communities in Palestine, as if they were completely marginal and insignificant.
Balfour Deklarasyonu aslında stratejik bir hamleydi. Britanya, Birinci Dünya Savaşı'nın kazananı olmak için Yahudilerin yardımını almak istiyordu.
There was probably also a religious element in it because the rulers of Britain at the time were Christian Zionists, including Balfour himself. And Christian Zionists believed that the Jewish problem of Europe could only be resolved if all the Jews were sent back to Palestine to anticipate the coming of the Messiah.
It enabled the systematic Zionist takeover of the whole of Palestine, a process that is still going on today.
Birinci Dünya Savaşı devam ederken Edmund Allenby komutasındaki İngilizler Aralık 1917'de Kudüs'ü ele geçirdi.
General Allenby, on foot as a sign of humility towards the Holy City, marches his troops into Jerusalem through the Jaffa Gate on the 11th of December 1917.
1922 yılına gelindiğinde Milletler Cemiyeti İngiltere'ye Filistin üzerinde manda yetkisi verdi. Manda yönetiminin görevi halkı kendi kendini yönetmeye hazırladıktan sonra iktidarı devretmekti. Ancak öyle olmadı.
The British had an interest in encouraging Jewish migration to Palestine. They changed so many laws. They used some of the ancient Ottoman laws as well for their own benefits to favor Jewish immigrants over the indigenous population, giving them land and enabling them to have privileges that were not given to the Palestinians. So the British mandate was an opportunity for the Zionist movement to establish itself and move many of its institutions from Europe into Palestine.
What the British did, having won the war, they incorporated the Balfour Declaration into the mandate. Once it became part of the mandate, it assumed a kind of international legal character. That was the basis on which they opened the doors for immigration into Palestine and suppressed Palestinian aspirations for nationhood.
I would sum up the British mandate in Palestine from 1920 to 1948 is by saying that Britain stole Palestine from the Palestinians and gave it to the Zionists.
1918'de 56 bin olan Yahudi nüfusu 1922'de yaklaşık 88 bine, 1939'da ise 445 bine çıktı. Ancak büyük çoğunluğu hala Filistinli Araplar oluşturuyordu.
From the time the mandate was established in 1922, the doors were literally opened and it continued, it accelerated through the 39-45 war years until we got to the point of partition in 1947. When we got to the partition, their number was 665,000.
Oysa 1931'de yaklaşık 175 binlik Yahudi nüfusuna karşılık Filistinli Arapların sayısı 850 binden fazlaydı. Filistin'e göçü tetikleyen en önemli etken Almanya'da Nazi Partisi'nin hızlı yükselişi oldu. Bu durum Yahudilerin Avrupa'dan kaçışını acil hale getirmişti. Sadece 1933 ile 1936 yılları arasında 130 binden fazla Avrupalı Yahudi Filistin'e göç etti.
Suddenly, you are stripped of your homeland. People come from outside, from far away from Europe, claiming to be victims of horrors that were committed against them by somebody else, and you had nothing to do with this. And then you lose your homeland in order for these people to have a state of their own.
Yahudi yerleşimciler bir süre sonra verimli toprakları da satın almaya başladı. Bu durum yüzbinlerce Filistinliyi mülksüz bırakırken ayaklanmaların da fitilini ateşledi. 1936 yılında Filistin'deki İngiliz yönetimine karşı bir Arap isyanı patlak verdi.
One of the reasons Palestinian anger with the British mandatory authorities is that they allowed unrestricted Jewish immigration to Palestine and unrestricted land purchases.
People realized what was happening now. They were denied jobs, the land were taken away from them, and gradually they realized that they were becoming underclass community, as it were, or people rather, in their own country, because of this influx of Jews under the auspices of the British.
Since Jewish immigrants started arriving from Europe and occupying parts of Palestine, the Palestinians never stopped their struggle. They continued the struggle. My grandparents were in the resistance. My father was in the resistance.
İngiliz ordusu bu isyanı acımasızca ve çoğu zaman savaş kanunlarını ihlal ederek bastırdı.
It wasn't the Zionists, which was still a very weak movement. It was the British Army which crushed the Arab revolt with the utmost brutality.
It lasted for 3 years. 15,000 Palestinians were killed in the uprising.
Britain trained the Haganah and supplied it with weapons. And during the Arab revolt from 1936 to 1939, Britain cooperated with the Haganah against the Arab rebels.
1939 yılının ilk yarısında İkinci Dünya Savaşı'nın sinyalleri verilmeye başlamıştı. Avrupa'da savaş ihtimali İngiliz hükümetini alarma geçirerek Filistin politikasını gözden geçirmesine neden oldu. Olası bir savaşta Arap düşmanlığıyla yüzleşmek istemiyorlardı. O güne dek Yahudi göçünü destekleyen İngiliz hükümeti Mayıs 1939'da Filistin'e göçü sınırlayan bir belge yayımladı.
To this end, London issued a white paper which strictly limited the number of Jews admitted into Palestine.
This conference urges the British government to abrogate the policy set out in the White Paper of 1939 and to open Palestine to unrestricted Jewish immigration and resettlement.
This was to the disliking of the leaders of the Haganah and the other Zionist gangs, and they started targeting the British.
In 1939, the Irgun was the military arm of the revisionist Zionists, who were much more hardline, and they claimed Jewish sovereignty over the whole of mandatory Palestine, not just the west bank of the Jordan, but also the east bank of the Jordan. So they were maximalists.
In 1944, bombing of the hotel in Jerusalem, to King David Hotel, took place, and the British ambassador in Jerusalem was killed.
And that was classic terrorist act by the Irgun. The leader of the Irgun was Menachem Begin. He later became the Prime Minister of Israel.
After a bomb explosion caused by terrorists on the British headquarters at Jerusalem, one entire corner of the King David Hotel, a building of 7 stories, was razed to the ground.
The purpose of this was to add pressure on Britain to concede to their demands to open up, recognize their claims to all of Palestine.
King David Hotel was the headquarters of the British forces in the Middle East, and it was a very serious blow to Britain, which precipitated the decision to withdraw from Palestine.
1947'ye gelindiğinde İngiltere pes etti ve Filistin sorununu Birleşmiş Milletler'e devredeceğini duyurdu.
February 1947, Britain informed the United Nations that it is going to the mandate in Palestine, and it gave final date. The mandate will end on the 14th of May 1948. So Britain threw this hot political potato into the lap of the UN.
It had become so intractable. The two aspirations, Jewish or Zionist aspiration for a state and Palestinian nationalism, these two nationalisms were irreconcilable. These groups, like the Haganah and so on, these groups, by 1947, when Britain handed the matter to the UN, they were like an army in waiting, a full-fledged army in waiting. They had combat experience, they were well-armed, and they were in a position now to receive control of the entire territory.
אנו קוראים לאומות המאוחדות לתת יד לעם היהודי בבניין מדינתו.
O dönem Haganah içinde genel politikalara yön veren David Ben-Gurion, Yahudi devletinin kurulması için yoğun baskı yapıyordu. Aynı baskı Amerika Birleşik Devletleri Başkanı Harry Truman tarafından da hissediliyordu. Siyonist örgütün başkanı Chaim Weizmann, Truman'ı ikna edebilmek için her türlü yolu deniyordu. ki bu çabalar sonuç da verdi. Truman, Ekim 1946'da Filistin'de bir Yahudi devleti kurulmasına desteğini açıkça ilan etti. Kasım 1947'de ise Birleşmiş Milletler, Filistin'in biri Yahudi, diğeri Arap olmak üzere iki devlete bölünmesini öngören planı oylamaya sundu. Ve oylamadan Filistin'in bölünmesi yönünde karar çıktı.
Of the Dutch Committee for Palestine was adopted by 33 votes, 13 against, 10 abstentions.
Another feature of the partition resolution is that it happened during the Cold War, and yet both the Soviet Union and the United States voted for the partition resolution. One of the rare examples during the Cold War when both superpowers were on the same side. So the Jewish state was born not with one godfather, but with two godfathers, the two superpowers of the day.
That's it, ladies and gentlemen. Partition passed 33-13, and is this crowd excited? They're starting their horror dances now. All over the square, little circles are forming. People are laughing and crying and shouting and whirling around in the wild horror dance.
Planda dikkat çekici olan toprağın yarısından fazlası ve genellikle en verimli alanların Yahudi devletine ayrılmasıydı.
Even then, the Jews were a minority and they owned only 7% of the land. So under the UN partition resolution, the Jews who owned 7% of the land were allocated a state over 55%, which tells you how unfair this UN resolution was in Palestinian eyes.
Oysa 1947'de 608 bin olan Yahudi nüfusuna karşılık Hristiyan ve Müslümanlar dahil 1.300.000'den fazla Filistinli Arap vardı.
Everyone knew that this would lead to war because the Palestinians wouldn't accept the partition of their homeland. It was profoundly unfair to the Palestinians. But the UN couldn't come up with any alternative, so they voted for a solution knowing that it would lead to warfare and bloodshed.
For the Palestinians, that was an impossible proposal because you're asking me to share my own house, my own garden with someone who has just come from Europe. So it didn't make sense.
Yahudiler Birleşmiş Milletler'in Taksim planını kabul ederken Araplar reddetti. Savaş artık kaçınılmazdı.
Jerusalem rioters started fires in many parts of the city. Casualties amount to more than a score killed on both sides. But Palestine's most critical period has yet to come.
The UN partition resolution was provided a charter of international legitimacy for a Jewish state, but it also marked the beginning of a civil war between the two local communities, the Arab community and the Jewish community.
Much later, many people blamed the Palestinians and said to them, oh, if you only accepted the partition land, you would have ended up with a state of your own. And that is not true, because the Zionists were intent on occupying the whole of Palestine, but gradually and in stages.
And at that time, it would have been virtually impossible for a Palestinian leader to persuade the Palestinian people to accept the partition resolution. So they opposed the resolution, they went to war against it and they were defeated.
İngiliz mandasının resmi olarak sona ermesine birkaç ay kala Mart 1948'de Hagan'a Plan Delit olarak adlandırılan planı uygulamaya koydu. Planın amacı Birleşmiş Milletler'in bölünme kararını yerine getirmekti. Ancak operasyonların çoğu Yahudilere verilen sınırların dışında gerçekleşti. Arap köyleri ateşe verildi, bazıları mayınlar döşenerek havaya uçuruldu.
From what my parents used to tell us, my grandparents used to tell us, from what we read in memoirs of people who wrote about those experiences, it was indeed a catastrophe. That's why they call it the Nekbe.
Kamuoyuna en çok yansıyan köy katliamlarından biri Deir Yasin'de yaşandı. Siyonist milisler anons yaparak halktan köyü terk etmelerini istedi. Ancak bunun için mühlet vermeden evleri yakmaya başladı. Dışarı çıkmaya çalışanlar vurularak öldürüldü. İngiliz hükümetinin Birleşmiş Milletler'e sunduğu rapora göre o gün 250'den fazla sivil öldürüldü. Kadınlar ve çocuklar soyuldu, sıraya dizildi, fotoğrafları çekildi ve otomatik silahlarla katledildi.
Said that 35 pregnant women were killed. Some, their wombs were open and the babies taken out and thrown into a well. All of this was documented by the Red Cross.
وأجت يعني مجزرة دير ياسين العصابات الصهيونية في 9 نيسان ارتكبت مجزرة في دير ياسين ذبحت يعني المئات والمجزرة كان 350 ولا 250 ولا 50 هي مجزرة.
اللي اتقتلوا كلهم في الشوارع كلهم دبوهم فيه، مرة وزلمة بنت كلهم دبوهم فوق بعضهم. معناته دابين اللي امي وابوي واخوتي حاطينهم في البير ومسكرين البير عليهم.
Deir Yasin'de yaşananlar ülke genelinde büyük paniğe yol açmıştı. İnsanlar bir sonraki baskının kendi köylerinin olmasından korkuyordu. Siyonist silahlı gruplar Aralık 1947'den Mayıs 1948'in ortasına kadar 6 aydan kısa süre içinde 440.000 Filistinliyi evlerinden sürdü.
It was very vicious and inhuman massacre which took place. It struck fear into the hearts of these villagers, and that was one of the seminal events that led to the flight began to run for safety because they were defenseless and they decided to flee, hoping that and thinking that they would be able to return when the fighting ended. But this was not the case.
The city of Haifa and its harbor become the center of bitter conflict as the new Jewish state is born in the tense atmosphere of civil war.
14 Mayıs'ta İngiliz mandasının resmi olarak sona ermesinden 8 saat önce David Ben-Gurion Siyonistlere yeni devleti İsrail olarak ilan etti. Theodor Herzl'in Yahudi devleti hayali 51 yıl sonra gerçek olmuştu.
אנו מכריזים בזאת על הקמת מדינה יהודית בארץ ישראל.
David Ben-Gurion is known to be one of the founding fathers of the state of Israel. He was very active in the Zionist movement. He had a vision, and his vision was for a Palestine without Palestinians that would become a Jewish state.
In May of 1948, a new Jewish state, Israel, was born in a bath of blood.
ABD Başkanı Harry Truman aynı gün İsrail'i resmi olarak tanıyan ilk dünya lideriydi. İsrail'in kuruluş ilanından birkaç saat sonra Arap Birliği bu yeni ülkeye savaş ilan etti.
On the 15th of May 1948, the regular armies of the surrounding Arab states invaded Palestine, declared war on the newly born state, and the official phase of the war lasted from May 1948 until January 1949, and once again it had ended a Zionist victory and a comprehensive Arab defeat.
My father fought in the war in 1948 in an attempt to prevent the creation of the Zionist state in Palestine. He was together with my uncle, and my uncle was martyred, and my father carried him all the way back to Hebron from Jerusalem.
Bu süreçte Filistinliler zorla göç ettirilmeye devam etti. Kaçan Filistinliler genellikle yanlarına sadece birkaç hafta yetecek kadar eşya alıyordu. Hep yanlarında taşıdıkları anahtarlarsa bir gün evlerine dönebilecekleri umudunun simgesiydi.
My maternal grandparents who were driven out of Beersheba were told actually it's okay, you can go and leave and find a safe shelter, leave everything indoors, just lock the door, take the keys, and in a few weeks time we will resolve the issue and you can come back. And this is what my grandparents did actually. They locked the door and they kept the keys and they went to Hebron, but they never came back. As children we could see the keys, they were hanging on the wall all the time.
Filistinlilerin sürüldüğü kasabalara İbranice isimler verildi. Eskiden Araplara ait binalar İsrail devleti tarafından devralındı ve Yahudilere teslim edildi.
They had their own institutions before 1948, their court system, legal system, postal services, well-developed agriculture, cultural institutions, drama, libraries. All of these were taken.
I was born in Nazareth, Palestine, in 1948. My mother, she went to her mother to have me. They go a month before. We went back and I was 9 days old with my sister. When we arrived to Safed, Safed was partially taken over by Jewish population. We had 2 Jewish families that we picked up at Haifa harbor 2 years prior. When I came back home, I was 9 days old. My mother came to the gates of our community to get into the house, and we were locked out. And she asked if she can have a blanket for me. It was getting a bit cold. And they wouldn't even let her into the house to take a single photo.
Aralık 1947'den Ocak 1949'a kadar yerinden edilen Filistinlilerin sayısının 700 bin ila 1 milyon arasında olduğu tahmin ediliyor. Bu süreçte yaklaşık 15 bin Filistinli öldürüldü, 530'dan fazla köy yok edildi, 62 binden fazla ev yıkıldı. Yaşananlar Filistin'deki etnik temizliğin doruk noktasıydı. İşte yüzbinlerce Filistinliyi yurtsuz bırakan bu süreç Nekbe, yani Büyük Felaket olarak adlandırılıyor.
The Nakba was not a one-off event. The Nakba is a process that continues, an ongoing process that continues to this day. It's a process of the dispossession and forcible displacement of the Palestinians from their homeland.
This is typical European colonization. Wherever Europeans went, in the Americas, in Australia, and in Africa, this is how they behaved. They grabbed the land, took as much land as possible, and exterminated peoples who resisted.
Birleşmiş Milletler'in Taksim Planı İsrail'e toprakların %55'ini tahsis etmesine rağmen İsrail %78'ini ele geçirdi. Üstelik 1967'de Doğu Kudüs, Batı Şeria ve Gazze şeridinde işgal ederek bu oranı daha da arttırdı. İsrail bugün tarihi Filistin'in %85'inden fazlasını kontrol ediyor ve buna rağmen işgale devam ediyor.
It's a catastrophe, and unfortunately it is ongoing. Israel wants to have an exclusive Jewish state without Palestinians, or without Arabs as they would say.
Palestinian militants fired thousands of rockets into Israel overnight in a surprise assault by land, sea, and air, the biggest in recent years. Thousands of rockets have been launched into Israel from Gaza.
Israel is at war. We didn't want this war.
What Hamas has done is to perpetrate the worst war crime since the Holocaust.
That you call militants, but I call terrorists and animals, bloodthirsty animals.
It's an entire nation out there that is responsible. It's not true. This rhetoric about civilians not aware, not involved, it's absolutely not true.
İsrail, Hamas'ın 7 Ekim saldırısına haftalarca sürecek bombardımanla karşılık verdi. Gazze şeridindeki hastaneler ve okullar da dahil sivil yerleşim yerleri yerle bir edildi. Sadece 90 günde 22 binden fazla Filistinli öldürüldü, 1.900.000 Filistinli ise göçe zorlandı. Yani Filistinliler için Nekbe sadece tarihte bir gün değil, yıllar önce başlayan ve hiç bitmeyen bir felaket.